Appreciate so much Phil being on. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Coach. How are you? Roll Tide.
Well, appreciate you, Barry, and I appreciate you being on. I guess the first question I'd like to ask you is what we always get asked about every offensive coordinator. Just how well did Jalen Hurts play against the things that guys like me don't understand, and how well did they do offensively?
Sure. I think that probably the number one task, at least in my opinion, for Brian Dable, the new offensive coordinator, is that Jalen Hurts has obvious talent as a dual threat quarterback. He was very successful in high school last year for the better part of the entire season. He was very successful as Lane Kiffin built an offense around his skill set of being a dual threat quarterback. But as we've seen in the last two games a year ago in the playoffs, Bama was only 6 for 29 on third down. The other night against Florida State, only 3 for 16. So the next step for Alabama as an offense is to be able to convert those third and longer yardage situations. And the other night, on first down, aside from the first play of the game, Bama only averaged about 2 yards on first down. That put them behind the sticks, which led to the difficulties on third down. So I thought Jalen certainly showed some progress. He flashed several conversions on third down where he dropped back and delivered the football on time and to a receiver beyond the sticks. But to me, that's the blank in the Alabama offense, maybe the only one as they move forward. And if they can actually improve in that area, then they're going to be a very difficult offense to handle because, see, it's never just about one phase of the game. It's always about tying all three phases of the game together. And if Alabama can play keep away with that defense and the special teams unit, then they're going to win a ton of games this year again.
So their first down being not much led them to really long yardage for the third down. Is that what you're telling our listeners?
Yes. So in other words, the first snap of the season, Damian Harris goes for 34 yards. Well, that would throw your average out of kilter for the rest of the game if you just based it off that one snap. But for the remainder of the first half, particularly when the game was really competitive, and look, that was a really hard-fought first half. I mean, these were two teams, Bama and Florida State, that had done a lot of homework on each other. Both defenses gave up some ground, but when it got to that high red zone, they both were able to kind of shut the door on both offenses on the other side of the ball. So really after that first carry of the season, after that, Bama had some problems on first down. Florida State knew that they need to sell out to put Alabama off schedule and behind the stick, and that's what happened in terms of the end result of those third down conversions, which is a trend that happened at the end of last year, carried over to this game. But I did think that Jalen Hurts made some progress. And look, it's not going to be an overnight thing as you try to transition and expand a dual-threat quarterback into becoming a complete player. He's got the potential to do it, and I think Brian Dable's the coach that can get that done.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, it is good stuff. Phil, hey, this is Barry. One of the things I look at in coaching, especially the first game when you're playing such a high-level opponent, a lot of times you try to get an edge by maybe you false start, but having no penalties, no turnovers, getting guys on and off the field the first game because you don't have an exhibition game to get through some of those things. That shows me that Brian Daboll has a system there in place. Those guys are listening and they're disciplined, and maybe that comes from his Bill Belichick days and being with Nick Saban. But to me, that's coaching as well, not to make any mistakes on that side of the football. I wanted to get your comment on that.
Yeah, they were very clean in regards to those things, and typically those are the kinds of things that are very problematic in the first game or two because, as you pointed out, there are no practice games. And, the scrimmages, while that's as close to reality as it can be, you still have coaches, sprinkled on the sideline back behind the players, so it's never quite 100% realistic. So, look, I thought all those things went extremely well, and we saw that because of Alabama's execution in the little things, that's what Florida State didn't do, especially in the special teams part of it, where they really came unraveled in the third quarter.
Yeah, Phil, on the defensive side of the ball, you know, you lose guys. Alabama has these number one ranked recruiting classes. We know they got guys behind them, but I think they lost 2 linebackers for the year that got length and speed. How much depth is back there, and how many more injuries can they take there before you start to kind of maybe see a drop off if it were to happen? Anybody else get hurt?
You know, this is the first time that I can recall. This is my 9th season of doing the broadcast. This is the first time I can recall Bama having this many injuries at a singular position. You know, they've had a guy get hurt here and there, but to have, you know, 3 or 4 players, really 3 get hurt in the same unit, so to speak, has been very unusual for them. One thing that I do know is they do have excellent depth at the inside linebacker spot, and so that may give them the flexibility, maybe not initially, but over the course of the next few weeks, to maybe think about or at least try Rashaan Evans at outside backer. I mean, he really is probably their best pass rusher. In truth, I think they were trying to keep him at his familiar inside backer post while developing the other guys like Terrell Lewis and Christian Miller and Anthony Jennings, who's been a regular now for, you know, what is his second season. So, you know, I think that they can mix and match some things. The good news for Alabama is the fact that most of the programs they're playing against use 3 and 4 wide receivers. So Bama's not in their base defense that often. It's more of a 4-man front, so a couple of D linemen and a couple of these edge rush type guys. That's really where Rashaan Evans can handle that job, and perhaps it ends up being Keith Holcomb and Mack Wilson, and you know, maybe even a Dylan Moses by the time this is all said and done. So they've got some time to work through it, especially over these next couple of games, which, I mean, obviously Bama's going to be a heavy favorite this weekend, and you never take any opponent for granted. And that's the foundational reason Bama's been so successful, is that last week, while all of us were hyping up the Florida State Bama game and the greatest opener of all time, this week it's another FSU Fresno State, and the approach will be exactly the same within that building and on the practice field.
Yeah, Dad.
There seemed to be a lot of talk that Jalen only looked at one receiver, that he didn't do a very good job eye-wise with all the receivers. Is there anything to that?
Well, it's hard for me to know that without really going back and watching the tape. I would say that there were times where he had pressure on him right away. You know, an offensive lineman gets beat right at the line of scrimmage. All of a sudden there's color right in your face. So I think that impacted, you know, some of his eye control for sure. But again, there were several snaps where he dropped back and with time was able to deliver the football. So I think there were signs there of improvement, and I think that's just an area of the game that, look, this is what the NFL has to try and do almost every year. They try to assess these spread dual-threat quarterbacks and figure out which one is going to be able to become a complete quarterback. And Alabama, because they run a pro-like organization, they're trying to do it while the young man is in college. And so there's going to be some bumps in the road, but I think he's definitely got the ability to do it.
Phil, Tom Herman at Texas, you know, he went in, and I think Charlie Strong had a tough culture there, but Tom Herman gone in, and they've talked about he's going to change the culture and all these tough things that they're going to do, and then they play the game, and you realize Texas is not very good. They're a long way away. How long does it take to change a culture like that? And if you do a lot of tough things to these guys, and then you don't see success on the field, maybe they start to say, man, this stuff doesn't mean anything there, and they start to turn you off. I know it's too early for that, but where's the balance there with something like that, Phil?
Well, I tell you, Coach, in this world of social media and the idea that, you know, people make judgments after one game, you got to do it a lot quicker nowadays than the old times when you said, oh, yeah, you know, we can change this over a course of 3 or 4 years. You really don't have that much time anymore. And I think one thing that's happened here is the dynamic that Charlie Strong was very popular amongst his players. Remember, he dismissed a ton of guys when he arrived there. from Louisville a number of years ago. So he tried to change the culture at Texas, and now Tom Herman is trying to do it. I don't know Tom Herman personally, but the reality of it is he was the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. That was the year they beat Alabama. Obviously, that team had a lot of talent. Then he went to Houston. The Houston program, heck, Art Briles has won there. Kevin Sumlin has won there. Virtually every coach that's been there in the last 12 years has won. And so now all of a sudden you're in charge of one of the premier programs in name recognition in the country. And obviously they're going to go through some tough times here. But, Maryland was expected to be improved. I don't know that people expected them to go out there and beat Texas, but that's exactly what happened. I mean, and the Longhorns gave up 51 points in an opener. That's never a good sign.
Yeah.
Before we start talking about your book, which I want to talk to about in detail, last night Tennessee either can't tackle or they're not ready defensively for that type of offense. And should Tech have gone for it?
Yeah, I got a chance to watch some of that, especially at the end. And, that is that offense, whether it's Georgia Tech or Navy, you better know what you're doing trying to defend it, and you better talk to a lot of people and try to figure out exactly what you're going to do to stop it. And, people act like Tech just runs the same play over and over again. They have a lot of diversity within the way they run those options. They have a number of different, option-type plays. You have to work on all those cut blocks, which is something that's a little bit different. And, I saw Georgia Tech linemen take out two guys on multiple times where they went to use that low block, and the Tennessee defender gets taken down, and he takes out the guy that's behind him. So their execution was just extremely impressive. I think it's difficult to judge what Tennessee really has on defense going against that triple option style of attack. So, we'll know more about them when they jump into SEC play here in a couple weeks against Florida, which obviously the Gators have their own issues right now after what happened down there in Arlington.
I want our listeners to know that the book that you wrote goes all the way back to the Cleveland Browns, and it goes all the way back to Bill Belichick and Coach Nick Saban, as you stated, being together and the how they evolved. I want you to tell a little bit about the book, where you could get it, and so forth. It'll be a great Christmas gift. I think this is a book that really tells the times as they sort of evaluate. I mean, as they moved along to now from several years ago.
Yeah, Coach, what happened is Ray Glear, the co-author, he called me a few weeks after Bama won the fourth national title in 7 years at that point against Clemson and said, Phil, you grew up in the state. You were a kid when Coach Bear Bryant was building his legacy in the 70s, and they were so good. You remember what that was like. But then as you became an adult, you worked for Bill Belichick and Nick Saban in Cleveland with the original Browns in those early years when they were formulating some of their philosophies and approaches in how they were going to, put a team together, an organization together. And he said, now, you go spend 20 years in the NFL, then you come back, you've been the color analyst at Bama for the last 7 seasons, 4 national titles. He said, you're the one person that could link all those things together. There's really a story to tell there. And so that's what we tried to do, Coach. And the book, Fourth and Goal Every Day, went out last Tuesday. It's basically in every bookstore, particularly within the state of Alabama, that you would go in. You can order it online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all of those different outlets. But the book really is the last 30 years that I've been in football and the observation of remembering some of those things that were talked about back in the early 90s and seeing it come to life in New England and Tuscaloosa. I mean, these are the 2 greatest coaches of this generation, one in pro, one in college. I had a front row seat to all of those days back in Berea, Ohio. And there was an article at AL.com yesterday about how the Patriots scouted Julio Jones, and with Julio having a foot issue, they figured out that he could only run inside routes to his right and outside routes to his left. And so in the Super Bowl, they overplayed him to that particular side of the good foot. In other words, he'd push off from left to right. So they overplayed that with their coverages. And that's the depth of detail that goes into not only Bill Belichick, but Nick Saban. And you take the recruiting, and there's a huge difference between recruiting and evaluating. Alabama does both of those things. So they recruit, they evaluate, they develop. And that's one reason why, with this outside linebacker situation that occurred in the game the other night, we saw Keith Holcomb, Mack Wilson, Jamie Mosley. We saw a number of guys step in and play. Levi Wallace out at corner. Those are 4 guys that were not in the starting lineup that all stepped in and played well against the number 3 ranked team in the country. And that's why Alabama has been so successful for the last 10 years. And the book sort of tells you the how and the why Alabama's been so good. They don't just throw 5-star recruits out there and let them play. They coach them up, they develop them, and they scout the heck out of these other teams when they're getting ready to play them.
Well, before Barry's got another question, I know, but I want to tell you something. For these 2 guys, it is 4th and goal every day. There ain't no doubt about it, Barry.
Phil, if you talk to guys that work for Nick Saban, and I know you probably get different stories from different guys, what would the common, I guess, what they would say? Would they say, man, it was a grind, it was really tough, and I had to get out of there? Or they say it was tough going through it, but man, I really, really learned a lot? What would be the narrative coming out from the assistant coaches that have left him over the years?
Well, I think first of all they would recognize the football intellect. I mean, Bill and Nick both operate at a level from a mental standpoint that's just above and beyond how most people look at the game. So the intellect, the work ethic, and then the ability to adapt and adjust. I mean, I think those are 3 things that virtually every person that's worked for those guys would come out of there and say. And I think while you're going through it, it absolutely is a grind. But once you get through it and you move on to a bigger job or a bigger opportunity or what have you, you look back on it and say, man, those were the most important years of my entire career. I know for myself, I started off in coaching 91, 92, 93, Bill came to me and said, hey, I think you can help us more in scouting, and I think it would round out your football resume. I jumped over to scouting, think I would do it for 1 year. I ended up staying over there really for the rest of my NFL time. So, again, I look back on that now and said, man, that was the crux of my entire football life, and I think virtually every single guy that's gone through either program would say the same thing.
Yeah, no doubt. Great stuff, Phil.
Yeah, everybody but Lane Kiffin.
Do what?
Everybody but Lane Kiffin, but get some help.
Yeah, well, I don't think Phil's going to touch that one.
No, I don't want him to touch it. That was just a comment by the interviewer.
Yeah, okay. Well, Phil, we appreciate it. Sounds like a great book. I'm going to get that book because I love reading that kind of stuff, especially guys that are as smart as Bill Belichick and Nick Saban, seeing what makes them tick. So we appreciate you right now. I look forward to getting it and reading it.
Thanks, Phil.
All right, guys. Coach, I really appreciate it. You guys have a great rest of the year. We'll catch up later.